When elves first came into existence on Middle-earth, it was a pretty terrible place. Originally, it was meant to be this beautiful garden, one that the elves and men could explore and create beautiful civilizations on, but things didn't go according to plan. The early elves of Middle-earth not only lived in darkness, but they couldn't even explore their surroundings for fear of being taken by the dark beasts that haunted the forest and skies around them. What was life like for the very early elves, and how exactly did the Dark Lord Melkor go about hunting them? First, let's paint a picture of Middle-earth under Melkor's rule. This was the Years of the Trees, the second major time period in Middle-earth. It was about 15,000 years long, and for at least 11,000 years of it, Melkor would be the only great god living on Middle-earth, having formerly been a great Valar deity. He ruled from a giant hellish fortress called Utumno, which he had built underground. It was there that lesser gods, formerly of the group known as the Maiar, gathered together with him. And many of those lesser gods had transformed themselves into Balrogs, and another one of them at least had taken a terrible humanoid form. We would know him later as Sauron. It was also during this period that the great dark storm god, Alsei, was likely in service to Melkor. If we draw some analogies to our own world, we can see that Utumno is sort of like hell, and that the Balrogs and Sauron are similar to fallen angels or demons. And these were the most dominant powers on Middle-earth at the time, since the other gods, the Valar and the Maiar, had decided to abandon it. So you can see how terrifying of a place the early world was for elves. But it wasn't just the threat of the Balrogs from below that was terrifying. Melkor created other horrible monsters too. He would take the creatures that the other gods had made or nurtured and corrupt them. It's likely that at this time he made monsters like fell beasts, wargs, and even the Watcher in the Water, which we know slumbered outside of Durin's door in the Third Age. These monsters walked the surface of Middle-earth and killed each other ruthlessly. Tolkien doesn't give us a ton of great descriptions of them and doesn't even name any of them, but he does let us know that they were all giant, scary, horned monsters. And the line that really sticks in my mind, which you've probably heard me say quite often, is that these early corrupted beasts were so bloodlustful that they would literally stain the earth with the blood of their prey. That means they were such depraved killing machines that the actual soil around their lairs, or the places they inhabited, would be coated in blood. Again, that's a pretty horrible place to live. Now, imagine you're one of those early elves. You came into existence around the year 11,000 during the Years of the Trees. We're talking about solar years here, the years that you and I know, not the years of the Valar, which were 10 times longer. And the only things that you can see are the stars in the skies, the giant lake that you woke up next to, and these gigantic shadowy figures in the forest and, flying above you in the sky. Oh, and by the way, the elves could only see stars in the sky because, well, one, the sun and the moon weren't created yet, and two, the original source of light in the world, the great lamps, were destroyed by Melkor in the previous eon. The world of the early elves was absolutely vicious. Now, why would Melkor go through all of this trouble? Well, for one, Melkor hated every part of the other Valar gods' works, because he hated the plan laid out by their supreme creator, Eru Ilúvatar. So Melkor spent all of his time trying to undo or disrupt whatever the other Valar and Maiar were doing. The elves were also the race of creatures that most resembled the original Valar, which again were Melkor's brothers and sisters. So that was a bit like pouring salt in his wounds. These elves, creatures made to look just like Melkor originally was conceived, were given all of Middle-earth to play with, but Melkor was originally barred from it. But besides these very personal reasons, Melkor also had a tactical reason to hunt after the elves. He wanted to make the early elves afraid of the other Valar and Maiar. That's why among the many horrible creatures he sent to kidnap and capture elves, he also sent dark riders on horses. Melkor knew that the only god that ventured into this part of Middle-earth was Orome, the hunter. The other gods were too afraid of encountering Melkor and possibly damaging Middle-earth in a potential fight with that Dark Lord, but Orome was so overly concerned with the eventual arrival of the elves that he risked traveling to Middle-earth in order to hunt down the different monsters that Melkor had put on it. Now, Orome was a hunter who rode a giant horse, and since Melkor fashioned many of his evil creatures in the same way, he hoped that the elves would shun the gods, that they would turn their back on the Valar and the Maiar out of fear because they were afraid of getting kidnapped or eaten. Since Melkor wanted to have power over the entire world, there was really no greater power he could wield over the elves than just simple influence. But whether or not actual Dark Riders came to the elves, or Melkor simply created a rumor of Dark Riders, was never actually confirmed. However, one thing was for sure. Flying dark creatures, of the same line of Fellbeasts perhaps, kidnapped the elves, and shadowy figures in the forest, perhaps similar to trolls, grabbed them in the woods. Although trolls might not have even existed at that time because they were meant to be a mockery of the Ents, and Ents actually only came after the elves. But I digress. Eventually, Orome would win over the early elves, and he would build a strong bond with them. He would later convince the rest of the Valar to return to Middle-earth, to wage war against Melkor and the Balrog and Sauron and the entire Dark Army.